fan of Rene Girard's memetic theory? Are you into that? That's kind of
I
my
I am Rene Girard interested.
right.
I haven't read enough of him. I haven't learned enough to feel myself competent with respect to Girard, but
Right.
I've been quite interested in what I've seen. So, and I even bought his. I have bought it, but I haven't read it. Kind of the main book.
Right. It's hidden.
What's that?
Things hidden since the foundation of the world.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've
now
got.
you're a reformed minister, correct?
That's correct.
Well, very good. Well, I have a lot of reformed friends, so I enjoy
Okay.
I
Well,
enjoy their ideas.
well,
And
tell
you're in
me.
Toronto?
What's that?
Are you in Toronto?
No, I'm in Sacramento, California.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah.
So, well, I don't know hardly anything about you, so maybe you could tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm in Florida, so I'm in the heart of Florida man country, where all the exciting stuff happens. And I've grown up here my whole life, but I love traveling. I do love traveling, and I'm one of those people that I try to have the best of both worlds. You know, there's an author that I really like named Bill Kaufmann, and he talks a lot about how America is a rootless nation. We've given up on loving our local community, our local region, you know, and the small little America, and we all want nationalism all the time. But he talks about how, you know, you can see it in the way we use our language. If we say someone's going to be successful, we'll say that kid's going somewhere, which means it implies they've got to leave their hamlet from where they came from.
Yeah.
We say this person's not going to be successful, we say they're not going anywhere. This kid's not going anywhere.
That's true. I'd never noticed that.
There's this bias in the language we use about, you know, like leaving your small town homeland. And so I try to have the best of both worlds, which means I want to be able to travel a lot, and I do, but at the same time, I want to stay in one place. So I was raised in this area, and I'm going to stay here.
Did you grow up in a Christian home?
Yeah, my dad's a pastor. Yeah,
Oh,
so
of what kind of church?
Of a Protestant church in a denomination called Church of God of Anderson, Indiana.
Okay.
The non-Pentecostal one. So.
Yep. And what did you go to college? What were your interests?
I studied communication at University of South Florida, and I've been writing, doing political commentary since right out of high school at 17. I started hitting the pen and starting to, you know, push my ideas into the national commentary world. And along the way, I've worked in some, you know, startup projects. But the political commentary thing has kind of been my Nineveh. You know, I don't want to do it. It doesn't, you know, I don't like reading the news. It's very depressing to see people do the same patterns over and over again when you think the truth is relatively obvious, and yet it's never really applied. And it's frustrating. So I got into it for a while, and then I got out of it and tried to start a business. It was a good business, but somehow circumstances brought me back to Nineveh. And I guess God wants me to call America to obey and love and do all that stuff. I don't know, because it just seems to draw me back. And I, you know, they say, what is it? Politics is rock and roll for nerds. So I guess, you know, it's for it, right?
So you say you do a radio show. What kind of station, and what's your radio show about?
The station is WFLA in Orlando. 93.1 FM in Orlando and 540 AM. It's a iHeart Media radio station. So it's the kind of the home for Rush Limbaugh, Dave Ramsey, Glenn Beck, all those guys, for the Central Florida and Orlando metro area. And I've been doing that show on that station for over a year now. It started off as a weekly show, then they found success with it. They wanted to move it to a daily format. So I do Monday through Thursday, the program, and it's called A Neighbor's Choice. And the choice really goes down to the choice that Jesus alludes to when he says, if you want to know what I'm all about. Go and learn what this means. God desires mercy, not sacrifice. And so that's kind of the choice that underlies the analysis of news and different topics of interest on the program.
So do you do Christian radio or conservative radio or politically conservative Christian radio? What's your shtick?
Well, the shtick is kind of just a program for people who are tired of groupthink. They're tired of blame games. They're tired of scapegoat ping pong, which is what I call politics, where we're just blaming the other side over and over again. And they want to know the truth. They want to know the truth about foreign policy. They want to know the truth about economics. They want to know the truth about justice and ethics. They want to know the truth about nutrition. So we go into all kinds of things, but it's all about slaying sacred cows. So I believe that Jesus is the true atheist of our time. And what I mean by that is that the gods, watch this, the gods of our time are government. We worship government and ideology. We worship politics for our salvation. And the only way you can get out of that is to learn that there is no God in the temple of the state and all of its different crony allies around the world. So that's kind of the running theme, that if you want to know true knowledge, if you want to understand how to move society forward in a positive direction, you can only do so by imitating the person of Jesus in a real down-to-earth way. I mean, the archetype stuff is great, but you've got to imitate the person of Jesus in a very kind of tangible, direct way. You know, I mean, when Jesus is walking on water, he doesn't let Peter stay in the boat and just worship him from afar. My goodness, you're so heroic. You're Hercules. Look at you. He doesn't do that. But functionally, that's how oftentimes Christians seem to treat Jesus, as if, you know, he's Hercules. You can't do what he does. So you go ahead and support endless wars and endless debt and all the little endless consumerism and all this stuff because you can't be Jesus. So just let Jesus be Jesus. Say your prayers, eat your vitamins, like Hulk Hogan told you. You know, just be a good little, follower in name only. And really, we're called to get out of the boat and to walk on water too, to become Jesus, to be like Jesus. And that's why we're supposed to eat him and drink his blood. And I believe that's a way of trying to demonstrate how we're supposed to imitate him very directly, you know.
Okay. Now, you pretty early on, you had an interview with Jordan Peterson. So he came on your radio radar pretty early on. How did that happen?
I don't remember how I found his work, but he had his book release, 12 Rules for Life, and I was able to set up the day of his book release in New York City. I did one of the first interviews with him, and it was a great discussion. And I've met a lot of people along the way from Jordan Peterson's community that have really been interested in the similarities and also differences between the approach he takes with the scripture and what I'm trying to do in my own work. But I think Peterson is a great, what would I say? What's that word they say for marijuana as a gateway drug? Yeah, he's a gateway drug to studying the scripture in a way that, in our society, you're considered, not literate if you take the Bible seriously, right? And so he's very intelligent and very well-spoken and well-read. And so he allows children of our time, millennials and Generation Z, my generation and older, to have the excuse to engage these stories again without looking unfashionable by their peers, right? They don't want to look unfashionable. And his intellectual language allows that process to take place, which is good,
So where do you think the Jordan Peterson phenomenon will be going?
I have no idea. I think he's gonna, guess he's got a new book out. Here's the interesting thing about, these phenomena is that, we always say we don't want to have a cult of personality, right? But it seems to me that that's the only way by which humans get animated and excited about doing something in life, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. The Ron Paul campaign. I was a big follower of Ron Paul when I was in college and stuff. And I, even helped write some ads for him and some to target Christian voters in some Iowa and South Carolina. And, it was interesting because he galvanized millions of people from all walks of life. And he made a lot of people, kind of like Jordan Peterson did, a lot of atheists and secular people would say, you know what, I don't like Christianity, but I like Ron Paul. If he's a Christian, it makes me think twice about dismissing Christianity, because I like the way, when Mitt Romney and these showboat, arrogant people, when they interrupt him on stage, he's always a gentleman. He always keeps his principles no matter which audience he's talking to. If that's what Christian is, I'm interested. And I thought he kind of did what Jordan Peterson did. But then, after the movement, after his campaigns, the movement kind of dispersed and went into all these different directions. Some went to Trump, some went to Bernie Sanders, some went to the Libertarian Party, and some went wherever knows. But the point is it seems as if humans they desperately need role models to get them animated. And so I don't know if Jordan Peterson wants to continue to dive into his work on the way he's been doing it, he'll probably be able to dive deeper and keep his movement going. If he decides he'd like to scale back a little bit, people have a hard time taking up the ball and rolling it down the field without their hero kind of guiding them. And that's nothing to do with intellect. It's just the way we all operate,
So you also did an interview with David Bentley Hart.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Oh, it was exciting. He's I was trying to, that was my attempt. We've engaged a few times in email back and forth. And I said, we need to do something on video, because you are someone who, proudly claims to be on the left. You're someone who has an interest. He's someone who's, I guess he would call himself a socialist.
David Bentley Hart? I don't know anything about David Bentley Hart's politics. I've only read his religious stuff. So
I'd read a little bit of, and I didn't really know either. I just heard a little bit of stuff, and I figured, okay, maybe this is someone who we can have a kind of a great opportunity to come together on some consensus for how Christians should act ethically in civic life. And it was interesting because I saw so much opportunity for agreement, but when he understood that I believed in private property, and once he believed that I was friends with libertarians, he wanted to insist that there was no way we could be on the same team. He's, I wish you well, but from afar kind of deal. And it was an interesting discussion. I learned, kind of how he approaches these things. And the thing that I've tried to reach out to some of they call them anarcho-communists and libertarian socialists and so on, is to say, look, let's agree on a few principles together, and let's try to get rid of statism and its awful effects on human society. Let's try to shift people's consciousness away from that together, and then we can argue and quibble about the ethics of private property and so on once we get to that point. But so far, there's so much we can agree on. None of us like spying. None of us like endless wars. None of us like debt. None of us like the drug war. None of us like, there's so much to agree on. And he even said, he, as someone who is very proudly leftist in his way of thinking, he's against money and against property. And I mean, he would, want to nuance all that out, but he's someone who said the IRS is an immoral institution, so you don't usually find people on the left who have that kind of nuanced perspective, right? And I thought, well, that's an interesting place to start. Why can't we build a coalition of Christian people who are engaging the public square to articulate what Christian ethics actually looks like in the ballot box and on the jury pool, right? I mean, I think that's what, you and I are doing right now, is that we need, there's this massive vacuum in America for people in the public square who represent an accurate attempt at trying to distill and explain the ethics of Jesus for politics in our culture. With the moral majority, they dominated for so long, but now they're gone, most of them. And what's really on the public, who's the C.S. Lewis? Who is the G.K. Chesterton of our time? who's going in and articulating a really in-depth defense of Christian ethics and its proper form. You see some good people, but by and large, it seems as if the beauty and the radical excitement about the kingdom of heaven is missing from the way it's discussed by Christians in the public square. You know what I mean? And there's no teeth to it. We don't have teeth.
What do you think?
If anything, Jesus has a bite to his message, right?
You know, C.S. Lewis in that framing is interesting, because while he did some radio programming during the Second World War and did some pieces that had some political message, he didn't. I mean, I guess my framing is that the politics is about now and religion is about always. And so, you know, it's pretty clear that your politics is downstream from your religion, but it's a pretty complex interrelationship between the two for people. And so, you know, I grew up my father pastored a church in an African American community, and so my politics growing up very much reflected African American values, which is sort of funny because in America you sort of had this, you know, the moral majority tended to be white evangelicals, black Christians, church-going Christians. They've always tended to lean more Democrat, even if many of their cultural and social values were fairly conservative. And so, I mean, it's a very complex field in terms of politics and religion.
Yeah, I agree. It is complex, but I think we have an opportunity to try to simplify it a little bit. You know, I mean, I believe in being in the world but not of the world. So you can be in politics but not of politics, be in political debates but not resting your faith in the promises of government and politics to accomplish the aims that they pretend they're going to accomplish. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, like N.T. Wright talks about the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, right? Bring it, you know, into the kingdom of God is within you all, Jesus says. That plural word he uses, with you all, basically. He's saying the kingdom of God is within y'all, right? If we would say that in the South, right? So that's not an internal thing, like the kingdom of God is within your internal unique self, like the New Age people want to take that. It's about the kingdom of God is within you as a collective. And so, you know, we have this posture in America still, because of the influence of certain erroneous theologies, to act like the defeated soldiers in Vietnam who are on the tops of rooftops waiting for helicopters to pick them up from a failed war. That's the way Christians act when it comes to engaging oftentimes culture and politics. It's like, all right, you know, it's all going downhill. It's all going to junk. So let's just wait for Jesus to save us and rescue us from this awful satanic mess. But I believe that, you know, when Jesus quotes that there's the passage when he's coming into Jerusalem, and they tell him, you know, silence your followers. And he says, if they're silent, the stones will cry out. He's quoting from Habakkuk 2. And in that prophecy, right after that portion that he quoted, it talks about why do the nations rage in vain? You know, and then it says, the knowledge of the Lord will fill the earth as the ocean is wet. And I believe that's something that is intrinsically a part of the mission of the church. The knowledge of the Lord should fill the earth as the ocean is wet. And it's not a defeatist downhill path. Don't know where I fit on the millennial debate. I don't even know if, you know, that's as important, but I'm interested in the idea that we've got a lot of work to do. The garden, you know, that the Bible begins in a garden, it ends in a city, and there's a technological direction with what we're supposed to do as Christians. Jesus spends most of his ministry healing people from diseases to manifest the kingdom of God's, defeat of of bondage, bondage of pain, bondage of misery, bondage of alienation and isolation. All of those things are trying to be answered by politics, but only the imitation of Jesus can unlock the solutions for these things. So I don't believe it's about going, I don't really think it's so important about where you go after you die. It's about how you manifest the kingdom of God as a community in your own life now. And there is an afterlife. I have no problem with that. I'm just saying I don't think that's the point of what Jesus was emphasizing.
Now when we chatted a little bit to talk about this, you mentioned Rene Girard, and what drew you to his work?
Well, again, it was a thought that I felt like the way I understood Jesus being taught in various circles and theological conversations, I felt like it was missing something. You know, I would read Nietzsche, and the way Nietzsche would talk about Jesus, I was like, man, he's getting something here that a lot of the great theologians don't even see. And this idea of, you know, there's something about the story of Jesus which is about resisting the crowd, which is about, you know, being able to think for yourself and have the courage to defend those who are persecuted and isolated because of the cool crowd or the collective's, you know, might makes right, or the majority rules. And there was something very beautiful and radical about this that I think is way more inspiring than just a disembodied teaching of Jesus. And the way I put it is like, if you only have a theology of Jesus, and this is something Rene Girard and other people that have kind of tried to distill his work have said it this way. If you only have a theology of Jesus, then you don't have the full picture of Jesus, because he says, I'm Son of God and Son of Man, right? So if you just approach the Bible and the stories of Jesus from a theological standpoint, you're going to have a disembodied deity. So if we want to look at the Son of Man part, he's 100% Son of God, 100% Son of Man, then that means we need to look at anthropology, and we need to use anthropology as a way of looking at the text and seeing what it can reveal about our origins as a human society, as a human species, right? And so when we do that, now we're being consistent in our theological claims that he's 100% Son of God, 100% Son of Man. And when we do that, we'll avoid some of the long-standing errors that we've made in our theology and in our practice of our faith. Does that make sense? We need to have both of those in tension. That there's not just a spiritual truths we're learning from Jesus. We're going to learn where humanity came from. We're going to learn how humanity creates culture. And we're going to figure this out when he says, I've come to reveal things hidden since the foundation of the world.
So, well, John Calvin, you know, very much said similar things in that, you know, knowledge of God and knowledge of man come together. I don't mean they come together from different parts, but they proceed together. That we learn about God, we learn about ourselves. These proceed together. So now, if we share this, my guess is a lot of people listening to my channel don't know much about Girard. Could you give a little bit of an introduction to Girard and some of his work?
Sure. You know, Rene Girard, he passed away a few years ago, but he was most famous for being a professor at Stanford University. He was also a member of the French Academy, which is like the top intellectuals of France. It's a very prestigious group of just a chosen few scholars and scientists, philosophers, and literary, you know, masters. And so he had one sweeping theory, memetic theory. He called it the memetic theory. And it's a way of unifying the social sciences, including anthropology, psychology, including sociology, including you know, a lot of other fields, into a unified perspective. And he uncovered this pattern that is the core of memetic theory by studying the great works of Western literature. When he looked at in academia, when he started off, he bounced around from a few different universities, but there was very in vogue, as it still is, to deconstruct. There is no meaning in the text, right? There's no meaning. It's very granular. You're looking at very what do you bring to the text and how do you socially construct meaning from it? It's a slaying of the author. Think of this as a reflection of the death of God, right? We're slaying the Father every time we come to a text because we're going to divorce the author from the text so that the text has no Father. It's reflective of our culture. So he kind of was rebelling against that because he was looking at how all the texts have similar patterns. All the great texts that have been the most profound works of literature in Western society, they all have a similar pattern for how they show human conflict arising, human drama and comedy, and all these different patterns. They follow the same similar pattern. And so in a world where it was all about deconstructing, there is no meaning, he saw meaning through all of it. And so he basically, the model is a triangular nature of desire, that we desire not intrinsically because we truly desire objects and statuses that we want. We desire them because people that we want to be like have them. And so we actually are desiring our neighbor's being rather than the objects that we feel the compunction to want to pursue. And that's very, very, very tied to his understanding of the Bible, which I think we all intuitively share when we look at like the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. The emphasis is on the neighbor, not the objects. It says thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's donkey, thy neighbor's wife, or anything else that belongs to thy neighbor, right? So the emphasis is on don't look at your neighbor for what you should desire. But the problem is that human beings are wired to imitate to the mastery level that no other species has. That's what makes us uniquely human. And because we've done studies there where we've seen like chimpanzees, they will imitate on a basic level an instructor that tells them do X, Y, and Z patterns, and then you get a treat, right? And then they compared that with young children. And the young children and the chimps would both follow the imitational instructions of the teacher to get the treat. But what they found was when they revealed the secret by opening, it's kind of a complex thing to explain. You have to kind of watch the video. I can show you a link to. But when they found that the box that they were doing little maneuvers in to try to release the treat, they opened up the cloak, the covering that was over it, and now they could see that all those little push the stick in this way, move this lever this way, all of it had nothing to do with getting the treat. And once they saw that, the chimps would not go along with the repetition of the patterns of the instructor, of the human instructor. They would just go for the treat because they wanted to get the food. But the human children would still go through every step of ritual, even though they could clearly see that it had nothing to do with getting the treat at the bottom of the box. And that's an example of how humans, we just imitate to a higher degree than anything else in nature. And that is our source of greatest beauty and goodness, but it's also the source of our greatest evil. We imitate when we master art. We imitate when someone that has wronged you, we forgive them, and then they forgive us. That's an imitational pattern. We imitate when, we take turns complimenting each other, saying, good morning, how are you? And really caring about that. That's an imitational pattern that we're taking. But we also imitate when it comes to rivalry and envy and jealousy. And the Bible is clear that envy is something that is a very vicious and dangerous thing. That's why it's very keen on talking about gossip. Don't gossip, because gossip spreads the contagion of rivalry and envy and jealousy like a disease in a community. And so what Girard saw with the triangular pattern in literature is that humans were often in conflict over the same person. They were in conflict over rivalry over a love interest, or rivalry over a position in a university or a business or a community. And at some point, they become so fascinated with their rival as the more they are trying to compete for that perceived object of infinite being, right? Because those are tokens for what they really want, which is to be like their neighbor. And as they're imitating, the object disappears and they become obsessed more and more with one-upping their neighbor. And if you're in a conflict with that, if you're in a conflict of memetic rivalry, for your perspective, you perceive that you are more different than anything from your rival. But from the outside perspective, you look like doubles. They can't tell the difference, right? You can see this with childhood, skirmishes whenever you're fighting with a sibling. And then maybe you believe that the sibling started it really nasty, and you just responded in defense. And then the parent comes along and says, you're both in trouble. And you say, are you kidding me? This person started it first. This is an unjust punishment to condemn both of us. But from the outside perspective, you can't tell who started it. It's a crapshoot who did it. No one knows. And we see that with toddlers, there's plenteous toys in a nursery. They'll go after the same object that the other toddler has, and they'll just all fight over the same doll. Even if there's 2 Mickey Mouse dolls, they'll still fight over the one that the other person had.
Right.
And the first person the first kid that has the object, he's playing with it lackadaisical at first. He doesn't really care. But then when everybody else tries to grab it, now he's caught the bug, and he's going to imitate their hunger for it and pull back harder. Right.
Right.
So that's what makes human unique.
That was a super introduction to Girard. I've heard a number of people explain this theory, but I think the way you just did it now, it could be just because I've heard it a number of times and it's starting to sink in. But I think especially when you noted that, we don't just desire our neighbor's house or our neighbor's wife or our neighbor's farm animal or car. We desire our neighbor's being. And I think in some ways we desire to displace our neighbor. And this obviously, theologically in Christianity gets deep into the fall or the rebellion, Genesis chapter 3, where we're really desiring to displace God. And right. that's at the heart of a lot of our motivation. And that motivation leads to, as in the fall, a lot of ruin. So that was a really helpful introduction of Girard to me. That set it out in a very compelling and clear way. We'll see if we share this, we'll see if others agree. But I found what you did right there very, very helpful. You've obviously been chewing on this a while, and as I've really sort of brought it into your thinking.
Yeah, I had to take some time off in the wilderness of Saudi Arabia first to figure out what I just learned when I first discovered Girard.
Really?
I'm just joking. I was just making fun of how Paul had to go off into Arabia.
Right.
Yeah, but actually, I went to Egypt instead. That was a wonderful place, and that's a real story. But I want to, another example is Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes demonstrates memetic rivalry. Because you'll see, like Bugs Bunny, he irritates 2 villains, like the Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam, and so they go after him, and all of a sudden they turn into a tornado of dust, right? And you can't see who's who. You don't know who's punching who. All you see is a bunch of dust. It's undifferentiated.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you'll see Bugs Bunny walk out of the cloud, and the cloud's still fighting. Yeah. And he'll look at the camera and he'll be like, "Do you see what I'm seeing here?" They're just fighting. They've lost place of who they were actually fighting to kill. Now they're just in a state of undifferentiation, and I've already left the stage. Yeah, the cartoons explain things better than these sophisticated little intellectuals do.
Well, to explain what I call at scale, so it hits it. The intellectual can perceive its genius, and the children can understand it. I mean, there's there's a demonstration of mastery when that happens. And right. I remember Phil Vischer's VeggieTales. I mean, when he first did it before, he lost his characters in the bankruptcy, VeggieTales had a real mastery, because I remember watching that with my children thinking, this guy is portraying it well. So talk about the scapegoat, because then the scapegoat dynamic comes in, because you have the whirl of dust. They're fighting each other. They they don't understand why they fight each other, but they keep after it. And then, of course, then the scapegoat comes in. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, think about when you watch like Avengers or something, and the superheroes are all fighting and bickering. Again, to the outside observer who's not a superhero, they all look pretty close to the same, but within their little skirmishes, they feel like they have nothing in common. And then all of a sudden a villain shows up from outer space. Now they're unified and wanting to destroy the villain, right? So so superhero stories and movies are like a vestige of ancient mythology. They're they're a vestige of the way ancient communities told stories. And the oldest story that we know of in terms of human culture trying to make sense of the way the world works often involves basically one against many. This the one and the many. And remember, the Trinity deals with this too, right? By the paradox that God is one, but he's also many. There's three persons in one. And but philosophy and ancient mythology was wrestling with this, and I don't mean that in like they started with the abstract. I mean it in the functional sense. So I'm going to kind of peel off what that looks like. So when you have a community that is caught up in rivalry, and again, think of it, again, the best way to do is to illustrate examples of this process happening in our own life. You get fired from work, and then you don't pet the dog like you should when you come home. You neglect them. That's a scapegoat to the dog. You got fired and you want to take that anger out on something. It's a third party that you vented on. There's a conflict between spouses. There's a lot of tension. Finances are difficult or what have you. What do? You say, it's not our fault. It's Trump's fault. He's ruining the economy, or Obama's fault, or whoever. See what we have to unify and go get this guy expelled, fire him, put him in prison, get rid of this guy or girl. And then, that's what we got to stand together on, right? So we always find this mechanism as a psychological impulse. Whenever there's conflict, we can unify. And guess what? You're a pastor. Pastors are like professional scapegoats. That's what they serve as.
It's true.
And and there's vestiges of the archaic version of scapegoating too, because you're seen as like this man of God, and there's a certain special quality about you that you must solve all these things that no mortal can solve. But there's a desire to, if things go wrong, if attendance goes wrong, if there's conflict, if you said the wrong word in a sermon, anything can trigger bad blood brewing, and they need to sometimes fire or discipline or whatever a pastor to keep the community going. And oftentimes, because, and again, this is a complex thing, but one of the reasons why these schisms happen is because a community builds a cult of personality around a very successful pastor. And then when another faction of the community desires to scapegoat them to kind of unite the community back together again, then that minority group goes with the pastor wherever they go. This is a practice that we see in business. Steve Jobs is fired by his board because sales aren't doing well. Scapegoats have a paradoxical insider status as well as an outsider status. They're inside the community, so they've got enough of the community's identity on them to make them an effective blame for their problems, right? If they're totally different, think about this, if they're totally outside the community, then how can you really effectively blame them when things go bad, right? Because you need to have them be a part of the community to have some of their, their style. So example of this is like they used to, when they would sacrifice certain animals, sometimes they would wean them. They would make them drink the milk of the local animal's milk, mother's milk, before they sacrificed them, as if they had to get they had to channel some of the localness into the vessel of sacrifice before it would be effective for the God's pleasure. And another thing, when they would capture slaves from a far off place to make them candidates for sacrifice, they would first oftentimes give them the finest foods of the local community. So they're eating the food of the local community, and then they would even give them orgies. So they're doing things with the local women, and they're violating all these taboos that the local people don't get to have, and then they're finally presented in a mock king sacrifice where they're paraded as a god, dressed up in arraignment and robes of adornment, and then they're murdered to sacrifice to the god. So why is this? Why do we need to select people that that then need to get some of their insider status, but also a little bit of outsider status? That balance needs to be kind of there to make them an effective scapegoat. So think about the origins of why this might have occurred. That's what Girard was looking at. If human beings are very imitationally driven, then there needs to be a way to effectively channel that imitation in a safe way when the imitation is negative. Think about Lamech. Remember, Cain kills Abel,
Yep.
and then he founds the first city. So that's how we know cities are founded on bloodshed. The Bible says that. And then, there's the mark of Cain. If you kill Cain, right? What is it? 7 times
Right.
avenged.
Right.
And by the time we get to Lamech, just a few generations later, is it 70?
Yep. 7. That's right. It's
That's
7 times 7. So yeah.
So see how humans are different from wolves. If a wolf beats another wolf, they don't murder everybody from that wolf's family. They will usually spare the life of the wolf they've defeated for alpha status. But humans, we just go on and on with bad blood. We just go on and on with vengeance and pettiness and hate. Just go look at the politics. You'll see it every single day.
Yeah.
Never ends. But the way you have to be able to find a way to resolve that, or else the whole community is going to go to hell in a handbasket, literally. And so the way you would do that is, if everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else, so they're literally mimicking the spirit of accusation, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That has to start to collect towards a common, agreed upon cause of all the bad blood. And that person usually has an arbitrary difference which makes them stand out. So think about it. When we're losing our sense of identity, and again, this is something very interesting. We're just, Girard's theory is just the scratch of the surface of where we can go eventually if we study this. But think about, have you ever seen that copycat game when someone starts mimicking everything you do, the childhood game? And if you keep doing that, you'll make a kid go crazy.
You'll really know them.
If your kid does that to their parent, they'll go crazy. They get sick. You've been copying me for 30 minutes on this car ride. Stop. It made me lose my mind. There's something there that's very important. We don't want imitation to the point where we lose our sense of self. Our sense of self is very important. If we're imitating to the point of losing ourself, there's a need to try to maintain a sense of self again. And so there's a feeling of a loss of identity that takes place when negative imitational patterns are contagiously spreading in a community. And then if you look at someone who's disabled or is a hunchback or has a disfigurement.
Well, when Trump did that in the 2016 election, people went nuts over that.
Right. Well, think about Trump. He's a classic candidate for scapegoat. They even accuse him of the things they accuse scapegoats of. They've suggested that he has incestual desire for his daughter. That's something that was often accused of people who would be sacrificed. That they were incestuous. They had to break taboos to make them worthy of murder, of the killing for the gods. Trump has orange hair. It's very garish looking. He stands out like Joker from a character from Batman or something, very distinct looking, garish accentuating features. So that's usually a candidate for sacrifice or a scapegoat. So when a community is going bad, there's scarce resources, famine, there's plague, there's something going on. There needs to be a maintenance of a sense of order again, and a place to channel people's imitation in a healthy way, or else it's again going to be murder of all against all. So that would be selecting a scapegoat. It's kind of an arbitrary, unconscious thing. I'm talking to you and you're saying, you know what? You've been a trickster. I've seen you steal some chickens from my hut. And I say, no, you're a deceiver. And and then I'm trying to get my friends to gang up on you, and you're going to this guy, that guy. And then we look over and we see, oh, I think it's that witch. You see that lady? She's got a deformed nose and big wart on her nose or something. I think she is a demon. Look at the way she looked at us. She coughed funny. Something strange about that. We say, you know what? I think you're right. And then she does something that we use as validation of our impression. And before you know it, we've got the whole group convinced that this person is an evil spirit or a demon or whatever. And we kill that person or we expel them from the community. And when we do that, it creates catharsis. It creates relief. Because now all that anxiety and all that stress that was building up in a time, especially of scarcity, has been relieved because we've united ourselves together to defeat the villain. And we've defeated them, and we feel an instant high, because it's a very, very primordial thing to take someone's life. And oftentimes murderers talk about feeling this godlike high. So when a community does that together, where once they were at each other's throats, now they're killing a villain, and they truly believe this person is guilty, because that's the power of memetic group think. Ideas spread contagiously, just like, behavior. And all of a sudden we've convinced ourselves beyond a shadow of doubt, this villain caused the bad blood, put a spell on us, and now we've defeated them, we've burned them, we've ate them. In ancient communities, they would eat them. Christianity is the only place that gives us a shred of evidence or explanation as to why ritual cannibalism is found at the earliest stages of all these different human societies that weren't even in contact with each other. Christianity will explain why that's happening. So we're so more, Christian anthropology is so more advanced than the weak stuff they teach in universities. Because, when Jesus says, eat my body, drink my blood, it's something he's trying to call us to our very origins, that you are cannibals. You eat each other. You devour each other's beings. You're trying to consume each other's being. So if you feel like you've lost your sense of self and someone stands out, then in some sense that community is gobbling the very being of that other. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's that sense of it's almost like an antidote, which is the antidote to chaos, right?
Yeah.
The chaos is the war of all against all.
Yeah.
And guess what? We're not stretching that word, because the Greeks called their pharmakos, which is where we get pharmacy.
Yeah.
Pharmakos is where they would parade a disabled person or someone who was poor, peasant or something, and they would murder that candidate or cast them out of the community, and that was their ritual for creating order. So that's a vestige of a spontaneous murder. Girard calls it the founding murder of human society, human anthropology. And that's why he says that's why Jesus says Satan was a murderer from the beginning, right? And then then Jesus also alludes to this when he says, how can Satan cast out Satan? And the word Satan means accuser. How can the accuser cast out the accuser? Well, that's the way Satan, and again, from an anthropological perspective, we're not talking about a being here, a spiritual being. We're talking about the system that has maintained order in all of these different kingdoms and cultures in human history. And that is the satanic kingdom. It's the way of the world, which is you start off with scandal. You breed gossip and envy, and that's Satan. But then that gossip and envy will create such bad blood that then you need to find a Satan to expel that bad blood onto. And that's where the other Satan comes into. So Satan casting out Satan. And that is what Jesus is going to bring to an end. That's why he says that house divided against itself shall not stand. He's going to reveal that in the cross. In the story of his passion, it's going to unveil that which was hidden by all myths in history.
That's really, really helpful. And again, you're really good at walking through the Girard stuff and laying it out in a compelling way. This is because again, I've heard a number of videos lay this out, but this, I think you just really offered an excellent treatment and explication of it. I found that very helpful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I've been picking your brain, so and you've been gracious to accept my my picking. Any questions you have, or anything that you wanted to go into?
Well, I just throw it back to you to say, where do you think this moment, where people, for the first time, it seems like in a while, have had an opportunity to be intellectual and still be interested in the teachings of Jesus, where do you think it's going to go? Obviously, Peterson was a big role in pushing this idea into the zeitgeist again, but there's others kind of, building up like that. I see people in Silicon Valley who they want to imitate the philosopher investor model that they see with Peter Thiel. And then they see that Peter Thiel is a big fan of Rene Girard. Yeah. And so you're seeing Rene Girard is starting to catch on as kind of trendy on on social media for people in the Silicon Valley world.
Yeah.
So it's like these are diehard leftists and atheists or whatever who are talking about Jesus. Like, yeah, we need to study Jesus. No, we're not going to believe he's anything like the Christians say, but we need to study what this is all about. This is some interesting stuff. So where do you think this is all going? That's what I want to know.
I think I don't know how familiar you are with Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor, well, Charles Taylor in his overly fat book, Secular Age, talked about the subtraction story. I mean, it was, people imagine very low resolution, big swings. Well, Christianity was popular and Christianity has been in the decline. It's going to keep going on the decline. The reality isn't anywhere near as simple as that. Christianity has, for much of church history, just had ups and downs. And there are moments in which it captures the imagination of certain groups of people, and then it seems to recede. You know, if you read Sheldon Van Auken's book, A Severe Mercy, which is, C.S. Lewis is quite prominent in that book. Lewis was sort of a mentor for Van Auken. You know, it highlights this little revival that there was around Lewis and others in the British Academy, and a renewed interest in Christianity. And there's, I think, a more accurate setting is that modernity in many ways ended in the battlefields in Belgium and France in the First World War. And lately I've been listening to Hardcore History's podcast on the First World War, which is it's a tough listen. But that First and Second World War, I mean, the beginning of the 20th century starts in this huge slide where the pretenses of modernity are exposed, and we are revealed to be not anywhere near as rational or in control of ourselves as we wanted to pretend towards the end of the 19th century. Now, these movements take very long times to unroll. And Peterson, I mean, we're at a moment now, and I think Trump typifies this of, I don't know how much you follow Jonathan Peugeot's work too. There's been an inversion happening. I mean, with Trump, suddenly we thought all of the scripts were going to be rewritten. And we've seen this on the left too, with the woke theology and the social justice warriorship and all of that. So people who in the 60s and 70s were all about, well, I don't want your stinking moralistic dogmas. Well, now the left has just, flooded with moralistic dogmas, and they're just proliferating. And so you're watching all of this interchange and all of this confusion going on. And it's at the same time that Peterson emerges, and Peterson emerges with a fairly conservative-ish moral framework. He himself isn't a political conservative. He's kind of a moderate Canadian, which is sort of, a little bit more to the left on the American perspective. But then he says all these things that don't seem to match that new system, and he's against the new moralism that is arising on the left. And then he gains this crowd, and you're right, he's a gateway drug for people interested in the Bible. And when I began seeing this, I thought, oh, there's a lot going on with this Peterson guy, especially in the phenomenon that really interests me. So then I started making videos, basically making a Christian commentary about Peterson, and that attracted attention and a following. And because I'm a pastor, what I do with this is I sort of try to build community. So people at first want to talk to me, and then after a while I pivot and say, okay, you and I, we've had a couple conversations. Now I want y'all to talk to each other. And what's happened in there is that all these YouTube conversations of people talking to one another about many of these things. And then along came, there was another University of Toronto professor, John Vervaeke, who is also not a believer, but he framed a lot of this more in terms of the meaning crisis. And then he's done a long video series on history of philosophy and then some cognitive science about, okay, why is it that people who sort of bid onto the Sam Harris atheist pill began to find themselves depressed and meaningless? And why is it that they could watch hours and hours and hours of Jordan Peterson and their depression would lift? Because you wouldn't think watching 15 or 20 hours of a Kermit-like preacher, psychologist, philosopher dude going on about Western civilization and pink sap and rats and monkeys and all of this would lift depression in people. But, so I started making videos and people wanted to talk to me, and then they would come and talk to me, and I would do exactly what we're doing now. I'd ask them about their story, and I'd listen to what they were interested in talking about. And I began to notice a pattern in which people would come to me and say, yeah, I was quite depressed and my life wasn't going well. And I listened to Peterson for hours and hours and I wasn't depressed anymore. And then I always dismissed religion as kind of, in Sam Harris type ways, as this superstitious mumbo jumbo. But when Jordan Peterson talked about the Bible, I thought, well, maybe there's something in that book. And then sort of, then they'd say, and then I looked at you and you didn't seem crazy or silly or stupid. So, and so then I've tried to encourage people to take a deeper look at the Christian tradition and look at, like you said, look at some of the celebrity thinkers throughout Christianity. And so people have discovered Lewis or Aquinas or, Alvin Plantinga or other thinkers. And they've said, these Christians, it's not that they didn't have any answers to Sam Harris. It's that the conversation was just sort of a silly conversation. And so I've been a pastor sort of trying to, I want to develop a community and not just a followership of me, because I'm incidental. And it's actually, if people are going to change or think or grow because they've had a conversation with me, then hardly anybody's going to be able to think or grow. But if, what sort of happened in this little community that has started in the wake of my work has been people started doing with each other exactly what I was doing with them. And I watched this happen and it was like, well, that's interesting. And well, it's very memetic. And so I was having conversations with them on YouTube. So they started creating YouTube channels and they're having conversations with each other. And some of them are doing monologue videos, commenting on Jordan Peterson or other things and applying their Christianity or working through their stuff. And so, for the last 2 years, this has been quite the thing. And I'm the pastor of quite a small congregation, an aging congregation, like so many congregations are. But then I said, well, let's do a meetup. And so I just went to meetup.com and said, Sacramento Jordan Peterson meetup. And the first time 12 people show up, and to have 12 people completely unconnected with this church show up even for free hot dogs, that doesn't happen. And so every month, and we just kept doing these meetings and more people would come, and all they're looking for is, let's just talk. And let's talk not so much about politics and the now, but let's talk about what's always and meaning. And Jordan Peterson sort of became the wick. There was, in a sense, all this wax that was sitting there, and Peterson became the wick, and it seemed like the C16 was the flame, and then suddenly things broke open. And so now there are all these very productive conversations between Christians and atheists and seekers and skeptics. And and people are kind of going into church saying, well, I don't know really why I'm in this church, but it's helping. So I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm still sorting through whether I believe in God or what God is and all that stuff. But, I've sort of been, I saw this movement swell up behind Peterson, and having been a pastor for years, I thought they could probably use some pastoring in that group. And so that's a good
thing you've done that. Yeah. Because the Holy Spirit, that word Holy Spirit means paraclete, and it means defender. So if you're defending these people who feel lost in nihilism, and you're giving them a defense shield and trying to equip them with the defense of the armor they need, then that's what it means to build Holy Spirit community. Yeah. And an antithesis of this is the Satan, which is accuser. So we've got a defense attorney on one side, and we've got a special prosecutor, special special counsel on the other side who's accusing. And I think the church is supposed to be kind of like a media, a grassroots media that can use YouTube or whatever. But, we're supposed to be a prophetic critique on powers, the principalities of the air. That's what we wrestle against. And whenever we talk one-on-one in private or person or on a media like radio or TV or podcasting or whatever, we are performing the media of the paraclete. We are performing the media of the defense. The world's media is always accusatory. Someone's a rapist, someone's this, someone's that. Accuse. Look at Trudeau. He's accused today. Everybody's just got to be accused. Yeah. And that's the way politics works. It's the domain of Satan. How can the accusers cast out the accuser? That goes back and forth. But because of Christianity's infection into the West for 2,000 years, we have to do our accusing game in the name of victims, in the name of the slain lambs that we can find around ourselves. And that's why today's scapegoating is done. I call it revenge of the nerds scapegoating. We have to, get back at all the powerful folks that, have oppressed us in different ways. But the problem is that because Jesus said it is finished on the cross, and what he was talking about was the old order. Paul said that those old orders were ruled by principalities and demonic forces. And Girard's anthropological lens would say, yes, those gods, those demons were actually deified victims that were concealed. You didn't see that they were victims in their origins of these ancient communities around the world. They were actually, we don't invent our gods, we deify and divinize our victims. And it's only the Bible that grittily deconstructs all of that. And it's only through the biblical revelation that we can even have technological progress. Christians are the ones who believe in a linear view of history, that history is going towards a purpose. It's not on a monorail system where we can't, impact how it happens. But we have a trajectory. We have a direction. The ancient world was cyclical. There was no direction. It was the same Lion King message, the circle of life. It was a static place. But Christianity believes that you can actually heal the world. You can invent discoveries to cure cancer. You can invent technological discoveries to be able to have clean energy that's too cheap to meter, that you would never have to charge poor people to build them for. We believe that in Christianity because we believe that our job is to be Christ's body, which is to heal the neighbors that we have around ourselves, and to use our minds to glorify the beauty that we're supposed to be imitating, the creative aspect of God. That's why we're made in his image. God gives us this beautiful sandbox, and then we take it and we mix it up in different places together, and we create beauty. We create win-win solutions through technology. But of course, that other media that's of the world, that satanic media, accuses and tries to rip that progress and stunt that progress, because it always wants to resolve things through blaming, accusing, and then violence. But that's what we have to be against. We are defending, we are forgiving, we are merciful, and we resolve the problems that communities try to solve through violence. We solve them through alternative means like market innovations, technologies, and breakthroughs that are win-win for everybody. Solving diseases that used to wipe out millions of people. So that's really what, there's such a broader vocation to Christianity than just a set of ideas that you study, like some kind of nerd game. It's way deeper than that. It's about how you create clean energy. That sounds insane. You're like, what does that mean? No, it has everything to do. In the garden, we're supposed to, take dominion of the world. It doesn't mean destroy all the trees. It means figure out how nature works in ways you didn't even think it works, and then use those things to make your family and your neighbors a better life, to make less pain and suffering. Did Jesus care about pain and suffering? I mean, is that even a question? But absolutely he did. But why is our vocation as Christians consigned to a private religion where we're supposed to be obsessed with me and my particular foibles? You spend all your day. So there's a way in which cleaning the room can become an obsessive, clean your room can become an obsession, where it's all about, my psychological things and why am I the way? Get to work. You know, when the disciples are looking up into the heavens, they have the same posture as some of our modern minds do. Let's just pontificate into the sky. What did we just saw? We just saw Jesus ascend into the heavens. And the angel says, what are you looking up for? Get to work. Go baptize the nations. Why are you standing around staring into the sky? That's what the modern man and Christians have become. We stare up into the sky about the wonders of theology or what have you. But then we don't actually get to work and become like Jesus said. Jesus said we were going to do greater things than him. Do you believe he's literal there? Or is that just a Hallmark card that he said to make us feel good, like when a little toddler throws a ball and it barely goes anywhere and they say, oh, wow, you threw that so far. You're so tough. Is that what Jesus is saying when he says you'll do greater things than me? What do you think?
No, you're right. That's what he promised, that we would do greater things, and we should take.
But that's considered blasphemy if you say that, right? I mean, in most churches, if you say, "Hey, are you going to do greater things than Jesus?" they'd say, "No, I'm not Jesus."
Jesus didn't give the formula for penicillin.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's what's so beautiful about being a Christian.
We should wrap this up. Do you have any last things you'd like to touch on? I've really enjoyed talking to you, David. I'm really glad you reached out.
Yeah, that's about it for me. I think what you're doing is a wonderful thing to build a community for all these thousands of young people who are hungry to understand what Jesus is all about. And are we being stealth evangelists? Perhaps, but that's okay, because people need to hear the truth. The truth sets people free. It sets people free from their matrix of envy and covetousness, right? And it sets people free from their false gods. I think that that today's political correctness is one of the best living examples of the truth of Rene Girard's memetic theory, because you see how religious it is. Yeah, you see how scapegoating it is. Yeah. How they march down the halls after Brett Weinstein chanting. It's like something from a Monty Python satire on cults and stuff. Yeah. So now is the time more than ever for people to understand the toolkit that memetic theory provides to give us a more accurate understanding of how Jesus predicted political correctness. He'll show you how. Wow. How he doesn't say it that way, but that's the way you look at it.
Right.
He predicts political correctness as a result of his kingdom coming to earth. It's a process that man will fall into an error, and you can see it in the headlines every day. So, I mean, that's maybe like an open-ended way to end it here, but there's so much to understand.
The way you laid out Girard's theory was very clear, and I've heard a bunch of people try, but you did a beautiful job of it. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can email me, david@aneighborschoice.com, or, join my YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing more stuff on that. And, my radio show is in Orlando, but you can also catch some of the replays and stuff on my Facebook or YouTube channel. So.
Okay. I'll put links to it in the notes then.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate talking to you. It's been great.
Thank you, David. I've enjoyed it.
All right. You take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.